I had been thinking about taking a solo camping trip for a while. Life had been feeling heavy. I had gotten laid off from my warehouse job 3 weeks before, and although I had enough money saved up to last me for a couple months, it still didn't feel right to just sit at home. I didn't have a girlfriend, no real friends to hang out with anymore, and my phone barely rang. The only thing that really made me feel calm was being outdoors, far away from roads and people. I liked the sound of the wind in the trees, and I liked not having anyone around. I figured maybe a few days out in the woods would clear my head. I packed up my old green hiking backpack with just the basics: tent, sleeping bag, some canned food, matches, small hatchet, flashlight, extra socks, and a few other things I'd need. I had done solo camping before, maybe 4 or 5 times in the past, and I had always picked places that weren't too popular. This time, I wanted to go deeper into the forest, somewhere where I wouldn't see another person for days. That's how I ended up driving to an old state forest about 4 hours away from home. It wasn't some big-name national park. In fact, most people I asked hadn't even heard of it. I arrived in the late afternoon. The forest road that led in was narrow and covered in potholes. Trees crowded both sides, and every few hundred feet I saw old, broken wooden signs that probably hadn't been replaced in 20 years. My little Toyota pickup groaned on the way in, but it kept moving. I parked at a small clearing near what looked like a disused trailhead. There were no cars, no fresh tire marks, no footprints in the dirt, just silence and the slow rustling of pine trees. I locked up the truck and threw my pack over my shoulders. I had no specific destination. My only plan was to follow the old trail for a while and then head off trail once I was deep enough in. I wanted real silence, the kind of silence that you only get when you're far away from anything man-made. I walked for a couple hours, drinking water as I went, listening to the birds. The trail got thinner, overgrown in places, and eventually it just disappeared into a thicket. That was fine. I left the trail and kept walking in a straight line, using the sun to keep my direction. By the time the sky turned orange, I had found a good spot to camp. It was a little patch of flat ground between 3 large trees with thick roots, not far from a small creek. The water was shallow but clear, running over smooth rocks. It felt good to be out there, away from everything. I set up my tent, boiled a can of beans, and sat quietly while I ate. The forest was cool but not cold, and the bugs weren't bad. After the sun fully set, the woods turned black around me, and I laid in the tent with the flashlight off, just listening. That first night was uneventful. I woke up once or twice to pee, but nothing felt strange or out of place. No weird sounds, no animals creeping around my tent, just the usual nighttime noises. The next day, I went exploring. I didn't have a GPS, but I had a good sense of direction. I hiked farther into the woods, taking note of any landmarks. A boulder covered in moss, a fallen log shaped like a bridge, an old tree stump that looked burned. I wasn't worried about getting lost. I walked for hours, took photos of wildflowers, and found a bunch of deer tracks near the creek. At one point, I found what looked like an old hunting blind up in a tree. It was rotting, maybe 10 feet up, the kind you'd need a ladder to get to. I stood under it for a while and tried to imagine the kind of person who had built it. Probably some old guy who hunted deer out here before they stopped maintaining the trail. I headed back to my tent before it got dark. I boiled rice and ate it with some tuna. Still no signs of anyone nearby. That's exactly what I had wanted. That night, though, something changed. I had just fallen asleep when I heard a sound. It wasn't loud, but it was close. A snapping twig, then another, then silence. I sat up inside the tent and held my breath. My heart was suddenly beating harder. I waited. Nothing. I told myself it was a raccoon or maybe a deer, and I laid back down. Just as I started to drift off again, I heard it again. More snapping twigs, this time followed by a crunch, like someone had stepped on dry leaves. It was very slow. One crunch, pause, another crunch, like someone walking carefully. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on. The light lit up the inside of the tent, but I couldn't see anything outside. The fabric was too thick and dark. I sat there listening, light in hand. I didn't move. Then it stopped. Nothing. Just dead quiet. After 10 minutes, I figured it had moved on. I laid back down but didn't sleep well. The next morning, I walked around the campsite. I checked for tracks or signs of animals. I did see something that bothered me. About 30 feet from my tent, I saw a footprint in the soft dirt. It wasn't a boot print. It was the tread of a sneaker, wide and long. Definitely not mine. I wore hiking boots. This was something else. I stared at that print for a long time. Then I checked the area. I didn't see any more footprints, but the moss and leaves made it hard to tell. My stomach felt tight. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe a hunter had wandered through in the night. Maybe just someone passing through. But the area was so remote. I hadn't seen a single sign of anyone since I left the truck. I decided to stay one more night, but I kept the hatchet inside the tent with me that time. I didn't cook anything that night. I didn't want the smell of food hanging in the air. I sat in the tent before dark, listening. Around midnight, I heard the sound again. Not twigs this time. It was a thud, then another. I turned on my flashlight and waited. Thud, closer. It sounded like someone was lightly dropping rocks. Not throwing, just dropping them. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe loud. Then silence again. After what felt like an hour, I finally dozed off. When I woke up, it was already light out. I opened the tent and looked around. I saw something that made my legs feel weak. Near the edge of the trees, maybe 10 feet from the tent, was a pile of small stones. They weren't there the night before. They were stacked, about 10 or 12 of them, in a little tower maybe a foot tall. I just stared at them. My hands felt cold. I didn't touch the stones. I packed up everything as fast as I could and decided to hike back to the truck. I had planned to stay longer, but something wasn't right. I started hiking back using my mental map. I knew the general direction. I kept my hatchet in my hand the whole time. I moved fast, not stopping to rest. The forest felt different now. I jumped at every sound. I looked behind me every few minutes. By late afternoon, I found the old trail again. Relief washed over me. I followed it back toward the trailhead. But when I reached the clearing where I had left the truck, I froze. My truck was there, but the driver's door was open. I hadn't left it open. I walked slowly toward it. I could feel my heart thudding hard in my chest. I looked inside. Everything had been pulled out. The glove box was open. My stuff from the center console was thrown on the floor. Even the spare key I had taped under the seat was gone. I checked the back. My emergency food stash was missing. So was the blanket I kept in case I had to sleep in the cab. But the truck itself was still there. I opened the hood to check the battery. It was still connected. I started the engine, turned over. I shut the door and locked it immediately. Then I started driving. As I pulled onto the forest road, I noticed something in the rearview mirror that made my stomach twist. A white truck, parked far down the trail, half hidden behind some trees. I hadn't seen it when I walked into the woods. It wasn't there when I arrived. I didn't stop to check it. I just drove. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station an hour away. I went inside and sat at a table, breathing hard. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call the police. I wasn't even sure what I'd say. There were no signs of a crime, really. No name, no face. Just signs. Just things that didn't feel right. I never went back to that forest. I never even passed near it again. To this day, I don't know who it was, but someone was out there. They had followed me. They had watched me, and they had keys now. To this day, I still check the locks on my truck twice, even when it's parked at home. I went camping alone in the middle of August, right after quitting my job. I had saved up some money, and I needed time away from everything, away from screens, traffic, schedules, and people. I had been thinking about this solo camping trip for months. I didn't want anything fancy, just quiet, space, trees, and the sound of water. I found a place online called Mirror Pine Ridge, a remote patch of forest in northern Montana, close to a long, narrow lake. The area didn't have any marked campgrounds, but there were reports of flat clearings if you hiked in far enough. A few backpacking blogs mentioned the place, but I only found brief posts, nothing deep or descriptive. That's what I liked about it. Somewhere people didn't go too often. I drove all day. The road got thinner the farther I went, turning from pavement to gravel, then to dirt. I parked in a clearing just off the fire road where the trees opened up slightly. My plan was simple: hike 2 or 3 hours in, camp for 4 nights, then come back. I packed light but careful. Tent, stove, dry food, water filter, sleeping bag, flashlight, tarp, knife, compass, bear spray. I left my phone on airplane mode. I didn't plan on using it unless something went wrong. The trail was barely visible. You had to look closely to see where boots had pressed into the earth before. Thin pine needles covered the ground, and I could feel the way they gave beneath my boots. There was a coolness in the shade, even though the sun was high and hot. The woods were quiet, still, except for the dry buzz of insects and the occasional crack of a squirrel darting through undergrowth. It was peaceful, almost unnaturally so. I didn't think much of it. After about 2.5 hours of walking, I came across a small rise that dropped down toward a narrow lake. The lake looked silver in the sunlight. That was where I set up camp, just above the lake on a little slope. I could see the full stretch of water and the thick woods on the far side. I set up my tent and laid my pack against a tree. I got water from the lake and filtered it through my bottle, then made instant noodles on the stove. I ate sitting on a rock, watching the shadows grow longer over the water. It was good being away. I slept that night with the flap of the tent open, the mesh zipped to keep out bugs, and I watched the stars before falling asleep. There was a breeze and the sound of the lake lapping softly below. The first day passed without anything unusual. On the second day, I explored. I followed the shoreline north for maybe a mile, just walking with no direction. The lake curved slightly, and I kept thinking I'd reach the end of it, but it kept going. Eventually, the slope on the other side got steeper, rockier. I stopped and sat under a dead tree and ate a protein bar. The place felt untouched. No trash, no paths, no boot prints but mine. Even the animal tracks were few and far between. I remember thinking that was strange. No signs of deer, no scat, no tracks near the lake. It didn't sit right, but I pushed it aside. I chalked it up to the terrain. Back at camp, I gathered deadfall to build a small fire, just enough to warm water and give me light. As I moved through the trees collecting sticks, I found something odd. A blackened fire pit. Old, not recent, probably months old or more. Stones placed in a circle, some partially collapsed. Burned wood fragments still inside, covered in moss. Someone had been here before, long ago. But what caught my eye was a length of thin nylon rope tied tightly around a thick branch of a nearby tree, frayed and hanging. The rope had been there a while. It was stained, weathered, barely holding together. It looked like someone had used it to tie something or someone. I stared at it longer than I should have. That night, I kept the fire going a little longer than usual. I listened hard, not because I heard anything in particular, but because something inside me felt off. Like the air had changed. I went to sleep later, woke up once around 3 a.m. because the woods were completely silent. No wind, no water sound, not even insects. I lay still, eyes open, not moving. I eventually drifted back to sleep. The third day, I made the mistake of going past the far ridge. I wanted to see where the lake ended, so I packed a small bag, food, water, flashlight, knife, and followed the shoreline again. It took over an hour to reach the part where the land started rising sharply. The trees grew denser there, and the ground became rocky, full of lichen and wet roots. The light changed too. It was like the sun didn't filter through the trees the same way. I kept going. The trail, if you could call it that, curved into the side of a hill and then opened up into a narrow passage, almost like a natural hallway between two ridges. And there, halfway through, I saw something that made me stop cold. A backpack, torn open and half buried under leaves and branches. Faded green with black straps, sun-bleached. I crouched and looked. It had been there a long time. The fabric was stiff, brittle in some spots. I didn't touch it at first. I looked around, nothing. I didn't hear anything either. I slowly unzipped the largest pocket, or what was left of it. Inside, there was a water bottle, cracked, empty, and a rolled-up shirt. I saw the shirt had a tag, worn but readable, Stevens. No last name, just that. No ID, no phone, just that. I kept moving more carefully now. That area felt wrong. I went through the gap between the ridges and ended up in a flat space, like a small bowl of land. Mostly dirt, dead leaves, no undergrowth, no birds, no sound. In the middle of the flat space was a mound of stone and logs, like a half-collapsed structure. I didn't go near it. I stood on the edge of that space for a full minute, then slowly turned around and went back the way I came. I didn't run. I didn't want to make noise. Every few steps, I stopped to listen. The trees pressed in closer. I felt watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was something else. Instinct. I made it back to the camp by late afternoon, sweating, tired, not from the hike, but from the tension that had built up in my shoulders. I didn't eat much. I boiled water and forced myself to drink. I kept my knife closer that night. I didn't start a fire. I didn't want light giving away my position. Around midnight, I heard something. Not close, but not far either. A dull thump like a heavy foot on soil. Then nothing. Then again, slower. Not steady, but moving. Something or someone was walking through the woods, maybe 50 yards from my tent. It stopped, then moved again, closer. I stayed completely still. I didn't look out. I didn't breathe loud. I lay frozen, gripping the handle of the knife. My heart beat in my ears. After what felt like 20 minutes, the sound faded. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I left the next morning. I packed everything as fast as I could and didn't stop to eat. I kept checking the trees, the slope, the lake. I walked fast, but quiet, following the way I came. But after maybe an hour, something was off. I didn't recognize the rise I should have passed. The path had curved the wrong way. I backtracked, then cut across an area of thick brush. My shirt tore on a branch. My boots slid on a wet patch. My pack felt heavier. I looked at the compass and saw I had been going east, not south. I cursed myself and turned back. That's when I saw the pile. Off to the side, not on the trail. A mound of torn fabric and rusted tools. What looked like part of a stove. Collapsed tent poles, a crushed canteen. Stuff left behind maybe years ago. A tarp, stiff with dirt, hung between two trees nearby, almost like someone had once tried to make shelter. It was strange. No bones, no trash scattered. Just packed, abandoned gear. Enough to show someone had tried to stay here longer than a night. I didn't stay long. I kept moving. My legs burned from the constant incline. I drank water every 15 minutes. I finally reached the last slope before the fire road near sunset. I don't remember how many times I looked behind me or how many times I thought I saw movement in the trees. Back at the car, I didn't rest. I threw the pack in the trunk and drove until I reached paved road. I made it to a gas station and sat in the parking lot, windows up, engine running, just breathing. Felt like I had escaped something. Not a person, not an animal, but a place, a feeling. Something buried deep in that part of the woods. Something wrong. A week later, I went online to search for Stevens and Mirror Pine Ridge. I found nothing concrete. Just a local article from 10 years ago about a missing hiker named Jeremy Stevens. No body was ever found. He had gone solo camping in northern Montana. The family posted a reward. The article had a small photo. A man in his late 20s, standing in front of a trailhead, smiling. Same style backpack I found. Same type of shirt. I never contacted anyone. I didn't take the backpack with me. I left it where I found it. Sometimes at night, I still think about that space beyond the ridge. How quiet it was, how dead the ground looked. It started with a need to get away from everything. Too many messages, too many calls, too many people around me, telling me what I should be doing, how I should be living, what I should fix about myself. I wasn't in the mood to hear any of it anymore. I felt like I was drowning in noise. The city felt too loud. Even walking down the sidewalk made me tense. Every honk, every passing bus, every voice from a window just made my chest feel heavier. I took a week off work. No big announcement. Just told them I needed time. Didn't even wait for a response. I packed up a few things, loaded the trunk of my car with some gear I had from years ago, and drove north. The plan was simple: find a quiet place in the forest, set up camp, stay there for a few days, and not see or hear another soul. I wasn't a total stranger to the woods. I'd gone camping a few times growing up, sometimes with friends, sometimes with my uncle. But it had been years since I'd done it completely alone. Maybe that's what made it feel right. No one around, no distractions, just me, the trees, and the silence I'd been craving. I picked a remote area in the state park, far from the usual camping spots. No paved trails, no picnic benches, just a patch of thick woods that stretched for miles. I parked the car off a small gravel road, shouldered my pack, and hiked in for over an hour. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Felt good at first. My body ached from carrying everything, but my head finally started to clear. By the time I found a good spot, a small clearing with a few flat stones and a view of a low ridge, it was late afternoon. The light was soft, and everything smelled like pine and dirt. I set up my tent, made a small fire ring with some rocks, and laid out the supplies I'd brought. A small hatchet, a couple of knives, a portable stove, some canned food, water filter, and a flashlight. I wasn't planning on hiking or exploring much. Just rest, just quiet. That first night, everything felt peaceful. I sat by the fire, letting the heat soak into my legs while I stared into the flames. The wind moved through the trees in that soft, steady way that sounds like a distant ocean. No bugs, no voices, nothing but me and the woods. When it got dark, I crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and lay down. I didn't even bother reading or checking my phone. I wanted the silence to stay, but that silence didn't last. The second night, I noticed something strange. It was around 2 a.m. I'd been asleep for a while, but something woke me up. It wasn't loud, just a soft sound, like someone moving through the brush outside. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe a raccoon, but it didn't move like that. The steps were slow, careful, like they were trying not to be heard. It circled around the tent once, then twice. I stayed completely still, breathing as quietly as I could. I didn't grab my flashlight. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited. Eventually, the steps faded away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun came up, I got out and looked around. The dirt was dry, covered with pine needles. No footprints, no sign of anything. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I just had a bad dream. That's what I told myself. I went about the day normally, gathered some wood, filtered water from a small stream down the hill, ate from a can of beans, sat on a rock and watched the wind move the treetops. But that night, I didn't fall asleep easily. I kept listening, and again, sometime past midnight, I heard it. This time, it was clearer. The footsteps were heavier, more direct, coming from the ridge above my camp. Slow at first, then stopping, then again. I sat up in my sleeping bag and held my breath. The sound moved down the hill, maybe 20 or 30 yards away. Then silence. I waited, eyes wide in the darkness. My flashlight was beside me. I didn't want to turn it on. I didn't want to let whatever it was know that I was awake. I didn't hear anything else that night, but I barely slept again. In the morning, I checked the ridge. The ground was dry again, but I noticed something that didn't sit right. A small stick had been broken, freshly snapped. It was still green on the inside, and there were a few spots where the pine needles looked brushed aside, like something or someone had stood there, watching. I didn't want to admit it, but something felt off. Something was wrong out here. Still, I stayed. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was just me trying to push through the unease. But I didn't pack up. I told myself it was probably just an animal. Maybe a bear. Maybe even a person from another part of the woods passing through. That wasn't unheard of. It was a state park, after all. People got lost. People wandered. But it didn't explain the way the sounds came at the same time every night. The way they circled. The way they stopped, like someone standing still and watching. The fourth night was different. Started the same, quiet evening, simple meal, fire burning low. But just before I went into the tent, I noticed something at the edge of the clearing. A shape, dark, still. It was standing just inside the tree line, maybe 30 feet away. I stared at it for what felt like a full minute. Then it moved, just a step back, deeper into the trees. Gone. I didn't go after it. I didn't make a sound. I just backed into the tent and zipped it shut. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake, holding the flashlight in one hand and a knife in the other. I kept thinking about the figure. It was human. I was sure of that now. Not an animal. Not some trick of light. Someone was in the woods with me. They weren't just walking by. They were watching. They had been watching since the second night, maybe longer. And they were getting closer. I waited all night for the sound of footsteps, but none came. When the sun finally rose, I packed up. Fast. Sloppy. I didn't care. I stuffed everything into the bag, dumped water over the fire pit, and didn't even eat. I just grabbed my gear and started walking. I didn't take the same trail back. I decided to cut across the woods at an angle that would reach the road faster. I wanted to get out as soon as possible. About 30 minutes into the hike, I noticed something else. Another broken branch, then another, then a shape carved into a tree. Not deep, just a single X scratched into the bark. Then another tree with the same mark. That's when it hit me. These weren't random. Someone had been moving through the woods and marking trees. Maybe tracking, maybe guiding. I didn't know, but I didn't like it. I picked up the pace. The woods felt tighter now. The trees closer. Every branch seemed to reach out toward me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every few minutes, I'd stop and listen. Nothing. Then I'd move again. I started to sweat hard. My shirt stuck to my back. My mouth was dry. My legs started to shake from the uneven ground and the weight of the pack. Then, finally, I reached the road. The gravel was uneven under my boots, but I didn't care. I walked fast, almost jogged. My car was parked about a mile down, hidden behind some brush. I felt a bit of relief as I moved closer, but I still didn't feel safe. Not until I saw the car. When I reached it, I dropped my pack and opened the door. I turned the key. Engine started. Then I saw it. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a strip of birch bark. Nothing written on it, just tied with a thin piece of string. A handmade knot. I didn't touch it. I just drove. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. Didn't even breathe right until I was 50 miles away. It's been months now. I haven't gone back. I threw out most of the gear. I haven't told many people about what happened. I don't think I can explain it in a way that makes sense. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person just passing through. It was someone who lived out there. Someone who didn't want me there. Someone who watched. And that birch bark? I still don't know what it meant. But I know one thing. I'll never camp alone again. Not after that. Never. I had been planning the trip for months. I was working longer hours than usual, barely leaving the apartment except to grab food or commute to work. My eyes were always hurting from staring at screens too long. I felt tired all the time, even after sleeping. It wasn't just about being busy. I was worn out in a way that felt deeper than just stress, like something in me needed to be reset. That's when I decided I needed to go camping alone, far away from everything. I picked a place I had never been before, national forest land that wasn't part of a campground. It was legal to camp there if you followed certain rules, and I wanted solitude. I wanted total silence. No neighbors, no reception, no noise from the highway. I spent weeks checking maps, downloading topographic data, and buying small gear to fit inside my pack. It took time to plan out how much food I needed, what clothes would work for sudden rain, and how I'd carry water if the streams were dry. I even bought bear spray even though I wasn't going into grizzly territory, just to be safe. I parked my car at a dirt turnout beside a Forest Service road, locked it, and hiked in about 4 miles. I followed a trail that wasn't used often, overgrown in parts, covered in pine needles, with no clear signs that anyone had been out there in weeks. I passed a few spots where it looked like deer or elk had bedded down in the grass. The air smelled like damp wood and soil, It was cooler in the shade of the trees. I felt calm, for the first time in weeks. Eventually, I found a decent flat spot beside a small ridge. There were trees on all sides, but I could see the slope of the land clearly. That made me feel better because I liked knowing that if anyone or anything came toward me, I'd see them coming from at least one direction. I set up my tent, boiled water for dehydrated food, and sat down on a fallen log. I ate while the last light faded between the trees. The first night was quiet, a little too quiet, honestly. I kept my earbuds in and listened to music as I read from my Kindle. Every now and then, I heard a branch snap or a light rustling, but nothing that worried me. When you're alone in the forest, you learn to accept some noises. Animals move, trees settle, even your own breathing sounds loud. I zipped up the tent, put my bear canister about 50 feet away, and slept with my knife and spray beside my sleeping bag. The second day, I woke up early and went hiking toward a stream I saw on the map. It took longer than I expected, and the trail was hard to follow. I had to backtrack twice when I realized I was heading the wrong way. I found the stream just before noon. The water was low, just a trickle over the rocks, but clean enough to filter. I drank, filled my bottles, and sat on a rock to eat jerky and granola. The sun came through the trees in thin lines, and the breeze was soft. I sat there for a long time. When I got back to my camp that evening, something felt different. I couldn't explain why. Nothing was missing or out of place. The tent was closed. My pack was still leaning against the log, but the air felt off. Still, too still. I stood for a long time scanning the trees. I told myself I was just tired, that hiking on unfamiliar land had messed with my nerves. I didn't even remember hearing any birds that afternoon. That should have made me more alert, but I brushed it off. That night, I was lying in my sleeping bag, reading again, when I heard something. Not a branch snap, not rustling. It was slower, a soft shuffle, like something dragging lightly through pine needles. I froze. My fingers slid to the spray can. I waited. A few seconds later, I heard it again, closer this time, then nothing. I stayed still for nearly an hour. My arm went numb from holding the can too tight. I didn't turn on my flashlight because I didn't want to give away my position. Eventually, I convinced myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a fox. I forced myself to sleep, though I barely did. In the morning, I checked around my tent. I didn't see anything obvious. No prints, no broken branches, no signs of digging. But about 20 feet behind my tent, I found something strange. A few leaves had been moved, not in a natural pattern, but like someone had brushed them aside. Underneath, the dirt had been lightly scraped, like someone had crouched there, just sat and scraped at the dirt with a stick or a rock. I looked around quickly, heart pounding. I didn't see anyone. I decided not to stay another night. I didn't feel right. I packed up fast. It was about noon when I started hiking out. I stayed on the trail, moving quickly, checking behind me more often than usual. About halfway to the car, I saw something ahead that made me stop. There was a man standing in the trees to the left of the trail. He wasn't moving, just standing there, half-shadowed. He wore dark clothes, and he was turned slightly away, not looking directly at me, but close enough that I knew he saw me. He didn't wave or say anything. He didn't have a pack or gear. He looked like he didn't belong out there. I didn't stop to stare. I looked down, acted like I hadn't seen him, and kept walking. My legs felt hollow. My back was tight. I wanted to run, but I made myself keep a steady pace. I knew if he was following me, I'd hear it. I didn't. When I finally got to my car, it was almost 4. Everything was exactly how I left it. I got in, locked the doors, and started driving. The road was rough and slow, but I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see anything. I stayed at a cheap motel that night, showered, and lay awake for hours. The man in the woods wasn't the worst part. It was the thought that he might have been there the night before, that he might have been watching my tent while I was asleep. I kept thinking about the scraped dirt, the still air, the missing birds. The next day, I drove to the ranger station. I didn't want to cause trouble. I just said I had seen someone acting strange near the trail. The ranger looked serious. He asked me what time, what the man looked like, if he had anything with him. I told him everything I remembered. Then he said something that stuck with me. That part of the forest had seen problems in the past. Illegal hunting, hidden grow operations, squatters, sometimes worse. He said they patrolled when they could, but it was hard to cover all of it. Most campers didn't go that deep. Most didn't stay alone. I thanked him and left. I never went back to that area. I think about it more often than I like to admit. I think about how careful I was, how much I planned, how I still almost walked right into something I couldn't see. Something that wasn't just nature. I don't even want to know what would have happened if I stayed one more night. I try not to imagine it, but sometimes I do. When it's quiet at night, when I hear a soft sound in the hallway or outside my window and can't tell what it is. Camping still sounds peaceful, but I don't go alone anymore. I don't go deep, and I never, ever ignore that feeling when something feels off, because sometimes it's nothing, and sometimes it's someone waiting behind the trees.